from the Morongo Casino Studios, it's Frosty, Heidi, and Frank on 95.5 KLOS and KLOS HD1.
Los Angeles.
Frosty Heidi and Frank Show, longtime friend of the show, big supporter of the Frosty Heidi and Frank Show from back in the day. What's it been, over 20 years that Myles Berman's been a big supporter of the show.
Easily, yeah.
That's a lot of beers ago.
Yeah, he's going to come in here and talk about all the DUI checkpoints and DUI enforcement patrolling for this holiday season like they do. So let's get Myles in here.
Hello,
Myles!
sir.
Myles,
Good morning.
you have not aged a day in 20 years. How is
Actually,
that
Like
possible?
when he-
Keanu Reeves.
And when he shaved the mustache, even younger.
Even younger.
Weird.
People don't recognize me anymore.
You just have to go, oh,
Until I
hi.
start talking.
You put your finger up and you're like, oh, it's Myles. See? Well,
He puts his finger up and starts talking. It's like, it's Myles Berman, the
Yeah.
Top Gun DUI defense attorney. As far as holidays, I mean, you got the big drinking holidays of like Memorial Day and 4th of July weekend and all the holiday parties around this time of year. They really, I guess, do they hire more patrol officers to come in for these checkpoints and
Yes, they get funded by the federal and state governments, and interestingly, it's kind of like I don't want to call it a catch-22 or a rat race, but the more checkpoints they have, the more arrests they make. The more arrests they make, the more funding they get for checkpoints.
I get what you're saying.
got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and obviously this time of year they have a lot of checkpoints, and then they expand the people who are the officers who are working, because they have more people on the street at checkpoints, but they also still have to patrol otherwise.
How do they decide where they're going to put a checkpoint? Do you know how the breakdown happens? It's like, let's just put one out here today.
Yeah, well, first of all, as you know, I post checkpoints on Fridays and tweet them at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you'll notice, if you've been following it, a lot of the checkpoints are at the same places over and over again. But they don't do it every week or every month. But there's there are areas where police departments know that there's a lot of traffic, and so where they post them more in high-profile areas where people see it, because they try and avoid, try and make the road safer, at least by them putting the checkpoints.
And we've all been guilty. I mean,
Well,
I
for yourself.
mean,
No,
I know as
and
my attorney
especially
would
not all my
suggest.
clients.
No, but you go to a party and maybe you stop. You go, we're going to stop by. Oh, stop by. I've got another thing to go to. Oh, come over, have a glass of eggnog, say hi to people, and stay for half an hour and leave. Now I've technically had a little bit of alcohol. Guess I shouldn't drive at all. Clearly, I'm not drunk. I had half a glass of eggnog. Now I get at a checkpoint. Oh, dear God.
yeah, and they ask you, Myles, have you been drinking? Now, as Heidi said, I've had a drink or two, but I'm not over the limit. I'm
Right.
not. That's why. What do you say when they ask you, have you been drinking? But you've only had a beer or two. Do you lie and say no, or do you say yes? Because if you say yes, seems like now you're in trouble. What do you do?
Well, first of all, I'm a little stuck when Heidi was saying she was drinking and that there's no mention of any marijuana. Not that
Yeah,
you would
no.
do,
No, that's-
not that you would do it.
That's
but we're
Frank's-
talking about.
Just come over, smoke a joint real quick, stay for half an hour.
I mean, it is legal now.
It is legal.
That's right.
So, yeah, the whole world has changed for you as far as the checkpoint. They're checking for alcohol, obviously. They're also
Right.
checking for, I guess, marijuana.
Correct. And other drugs and other prescription drugs. But getting back to Frosty's question.
How do I answer the
Yes.
question when they ask me?
Well, first of all, you have to know that you don't really need to answer the questions. Anytime a police officer comes up, all you have to do is identify yourself, show proof of insurance, proof of registration. Beyond that, you don't have to answer any of the questions. Now, when you do begin to answer the questions, most people, I can tell you what most people do is they say they've had a couple, 2 or 3. Which that is truthful. If they've had even more, but they've had at least 2 or 3.
Yeah, I did have 2 or 3.
Yeah, I guess you're not lying.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
But
So if you say that, are you now in trouble? 'Cause
well,
you've
you know,
acknowledged
the
that
officer knows that. I mean, he if he smells booze, he knows that he or she already know and can tell that you're already drinking. So it's a question to try and get you to admit that not only that you were drinking, but also that maybe you were drinking too much. But most people don't acknowledge that how much they've had to drink. But that doesn't mean that they're guilty, and it's not against the law to drink and drive. It's just against the law to drink too much or be impaired by alcohol or point away or greater and then drive.
Is
So
it
what's
against?
what's the great stock answer then? It's like, 'cause I feel like if I sit there, like you said, here's my identification that says who I am. Here's my proof of insurance. And I was like, so have you had anything to drink tonight? And I'm just going to sit there silent.
That would be so hard to do.
I'd prefer not to answer that. It seems like I've just answered it by saying I prefer not to answer it.
I plead the fifth, sir.
Yeah, I mean, what is the good stock answer to say?
Yeah, you always get me to pin me down, Frank. and I always come back for more.
Because
right. Glutton for punishment.
obviously, I mean, even if you're not breaking the law at all, you see a black and white, and everybody sits up in their car, does the 10 and 2, you know, just because the anxiety that seeing a police car brings. Now you see the lights in your rearview mirror, and maybe you've had one beer. But do you say you've had one? Like I said, you already admitted that you've been drinking, or is there a stock answer that says that doesn't admit you've been drinking, but it doesn't make you look like you're guilty?
You know, I wouldn't encourage people to lie, but at the same time, there's a difference between not telling all the information that the officer is asking.
That's why he's saying don't say anything,
Where
Frank.
have you been tonight?
See, that's why he's saying just here's my ID, here's my proof of insurance. So I think basically your stock answer, but you don't have to say anything.
Doesn't make you
That's
look guilty,
pretty good,
though.
Frank. You pinned Heidi down.
Yeah.
Doesn't not saying anything make you look guilty?
At what point do they
It's
call?
tough. You know, it's all I could do, Frank. Really is just tell people what their rights are. What they do. You know, that's up to them. And when you're in that situation, I mean, it's a life altering event. It's surreal. You're out of your car. Your freedom of movement is totally restrained. And so, you know, people are going through and trying to figure out what can they say just so they don't go to jail. But again, even if you say something that's not true, by how much you had to drink or where you're coming from, where you're going to, that doesn't mean you're guilty. All that means is, and this is what we would bring out at trial, all that means is that you don't want to go to jail. Officers have heard people say that for years that they only had 2 beers or a couple of drinks, and they've investigated them for DUI, and that he didn't arrest them. So, you know, what you tell the officer how many you had to drink doesn't mean you're guilty.
At what point do they call you, Myles Berman, DUI defense attorney, at 888-4-TOP-GUN?
When you see the
when do I
sirens
make
and you-
that call to you? When I'm sitting there being talked to in front of the cops, I whip my phone out?
You know, ever since I've been with you guys, I've been getting calls from your listeners as they're getting pulled over.
That's awesome.
You know, and it happens. But, you know, after... obviously, after you get released from jail, they should call right away. And that number I think you mentioned was 888-4-TOP-GUN. I've been hearing that for
The number
years.
4.
The number 4, 888-4-TOP-GUN.
And it's important to call right away because the DMV needs to be contacted right away in order to stop a suspension from going into effect. We need to collect evidence. And more importantly, it also gives a certain degree of relief to the client. Now they know they're protected, because up until that point in time, they're in limbo land. They're neither here nor there because of what they just had gone through, which could be not only it is a life-altering event, it also could be very devastating. People get convicted for DUI, can lose their job.
What happens if you refuse to take the breathalyzer test?
You know, you actually have a right to refuse, but if you do refuse, first of all, a number of things. That they can still get a blood draw by getting a warrant, so they can still force a blood draw. And second of all, if you do refuse and there is no blood result and you haven't taken a breath test, then the evidence against you is less, obviously. But there's also a potentially greater punishment with the Department of Motor Vehicles, with the DMV, with your driver's license.
Frosty, do you think you could pass a field sobriety test sober?
Probably
I'm picturing
not,
you do those
'cause,
things that
no,
we see them do, the
Can
walking.
you even stand on one leg?
No, I'm top
I
heavy,
feel like
unbalanced.
sober
and-
you'd be screwed.
Yeah, I walk like a drunk man, even when I haven't had a drink for the longest time.
You are a weeble.
Well, I saw you walk this morning during the break. I thought you were actually walking pretty good for.
Well, because I
this
saw you, I
early.
straightened up. Man, I suited up, yeah.
You know, the field sobriety tests are extremely difficult to do under any circumstances. Officers know how to do it. Ooh, I see you have some.
Oh, yes, some alcohol.
They're just
out
props
here.
since you're here.
That's just props.
Yeah, it's just colored
Yeah,
water.
Some props, yeah.
A bottle of Malort from your home state. of Illinois.
Good.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
tough.
Chicago. I've been out over 30 years. Anyway, so the field sobriety tests they're difficult to do under normal circumstances when you're in your living room, your home. Not all of us have the same dexterity. Not all of us are the same flexibility. Officers are trained to do it when they do. Instruct the driver after they're pulled over and investigated for DUI. It's natural to them. It's easy for them to do. Not to mention they have strong shoes as opposed to women who are oftentimes wearing high heels.
That's right.
Or they're pulled out of their car and they don't have a jacket on because it came from an inside place going to an inside place and it's very cold. That's men or women as well. So the wind,
So many factors.
rain, sleet, hail. I haven't had somebody do an earthquake occur while they're doing field sobriety tests.
Or maybe,
That'd be a
maybe
good
pulled
defense.
over on a hill,
But
possibly.
Right.
On a hill.
We did have a client once who was arrested, and he was in jail, and we had the earthquake. One of the major earthquakes hit, and the jailers took off and left him and some others in the cell while the earthquake was going on. Yeah.
Does he own the jail now?
Yeah, he owns the jail. Myles L. Berman with us. 1-888-888, the number 4, Top Gun is the number. topgundui.com is the website. At Myles L. Berman, Myles L. Berman. For your Twitter feed, where you say you post the checkpoints every single weekend before the weekend even starts, because that is public knowledge of where those are going to be. We did have Edward. He was on the phone. I guess he had to hang up. He said that he got a DUI, and he is a commercial truck driver. Now, he wasn't driving. He wasn't driving his commercial truck at the time. He wasn't at work when he got the DUI, but he got a DUI off work. Can he save his job?
The answer is yes, and I'm sure he knows to call 888-4-TOP-GUN right away. I can say that a whole bunch of
Yes,
times.
you can. 888-4-TOP-GUN. Call that Edward.
I learned. Commercial truck drivers have a commercial license, and if they're convicted of DUI or that there's a suspension hearing contemporaneously with the DUI, it's an administrative proceeding, they can lose their license for 1 year. It's a 1-year suspension on the first offense. It's to their commercial license. The second offense, it's a lifetime ban. And within 10 years. Wow. So there's a lot at stake for commercial drivers as well.
The marijuana, now that it's legal recreationally, that I heard that there might be some technology coming out that is much like a breath test for alcohol that the law enforcement is looking into. Is this a tech rumor, or is it actually, have you heard any news about this particular item?
I've heard the news rumor. And,
Yeah, right.
and there are some places that are experimenting in different parts of the country. We haven't experienced a machine that's able to measure on the street like a breath test machine or a device or a swab or anything yet that could detect the presence or the amount of marijuana. That I think that'd be much more difficult. And proving marijuana cases is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like tolerance levels are different. I mean, it's very for everybody, whether it be, I mean, if you are an alcoholic and you have to maintain a certain level of alcohol in your system so you don't have the shakes, well, that's your maintain. It doesn't mean you're driving impaired, but you're probably over the legal limit if that's your point in life where you have to maintain.
But you're completely functional.
And, yeah, with marijuana as well, when you have these people who are medicating with marijuana and getting very, very high doses of THC to manage like a leukemia. I'm talking, or something like that, where it's like, if this person's driving, it looks like they've smoked a pound of weed.
But they're just going to work.
No, this is maintained. This is for medicinal reasons. If you are on something medical, prescription-wise, like I said, prescription drugs, even, you cannot drive on those. So how does somebody even manage their life in that sense with driving?
Well, it's difficult, obviously, and people oftentimes think that because they have a medical marijuana card, that it somehow allows them to drive
Get out of
under
jail
the
free.
influence. Yeah, and that
No.
doesn't work at all. But the general standard that many prosecutorial agencies are using is 5 nanograms. but of THC. But the thing is, and you mentioned THC, that there's not all THC is equal. Let's put it that way. And there's
Frank's stuff's way different than other stuff.
Well, yeah, and there's different variations, and so and different strengths and strands. But that's just the manner in which the government's prosecuting. If individuals need medical marijuana and they smoke too much and they drive, they're just going to have to, the best way to do it is to try and avoid driving if you're, dosed that high. But there's no other way. I don't know of any other way for them to handle it, Frank. If they need the marijuana for medical reasons or other reasons that they're.
But I'm wondering if you go to court, it's like if you have that woman with leukemia and she's fighting hard, but she's got to go to work every day. She's got to make a living. So it's like when you hear her case in a court, it's like, okay, how am I going to convict her? When you set the case up that she is leukemia, she is fighting. This is literally medicine for her.
Well, oftentimes there's a factual driving pattern that comes into play, which got the officer's attention for the stop. So, for example, if there's an accident and they're high, they're not going to get as much sympathy as opposed to maybe going through a rolling stop sign.
Right.
But here's the twist. You have an accident, but it wasn't your fault, and it was the other driver's fault who was sober. And now the leukemia lady's got, a high amount of THC in her system, but it's to maintain. She's not stoned. She's just doing it for medical reasons. She's automatically to blame because she has THC in her system.
Well, yes, you're in your scenario, she wasn't at fault.
She wasn't at fault, no.
Right. And that happens where people, it's the same thing with alcohol, too.
Right.
That the chances of something happening, are maybe slight, but they're there. And even though you're not at fault, you can get arrested and prosecuted for being under the influence of whatever substance you have. And you didn't even cause the accident. It's just a matter of bad luck. But there's no other way. There's no way around, which is, I think, what you're asking. There's no way around even the need for medical marijuana or any other prescription drug when you have too much. I mean, it's just the reality of it. And we've seen a lot of prescription drugs. People arrested under the influence or allegedly under the influence of prescription drugs. I mean, sorry.
It's all good. There's no other way to put it.
You'll be hearing from our attorney.
I hope
that's the best.
after 20 years, all right.
That was your first slip.
First time he gets edited on the air. That's awesome.
That was your realest moment.
I'm sorry about that. I hope I was bleeped.
You're bleeped. You're fine.
Okay, good.
Jordan's got you covered.
But my point I was going to make, and I have to pay attention to what I say very carefully, that everybody's taking prescription drugs these days.
Right.
So the odds are having prescription drugs in your system for you people driving, look to the left and look to the right. One of the three of you have to have prescription drugs in your system at this very moment.
Not only my system, my pockets.
Yeah, right. You're always loaded.
And I wasn't talking about you guys in here. I was talking to you people, your drivers, your listening audience who are driving on the freeway or driving somewhere right now, looking to your left
Get
and
an
right.
Uber, kid.
Now, have you seen that? That if someone gets pulled over and they end up going to court, or there's some question about whether they had something in their system, and obviously the prosecution is trying to prove that they did have something in their system. Does someone's own insurance company also try to see if there's something in their system so they don't have to pay out if there was an accident? I mean, where it's like you have insurance, but then they're trying to go after you as well.
That's a great question, Frank. And we see a number of our clients who are involved in accidents, and that's another reason why it's important that, especially if they're involved in an accident, to call us right away, because we counsel them on how to handle the insurance claim. And if it's handled correctly, the insurance company will pay for it. So, and there is coverage, even if you're involved in a DUI and you get arrested and you're prosecuted for it, that insurance companies still oftentimes still pay a claim, even if, especially if you're at fault. But that's not to say that it's guaranteed that they will all the time.
Myles, of course, we don't want anyone to drive when they shouldn't be driving. Call an Uber, call a cab, sleep it off, whatever. But if something happens that you are pulled over and you need representation from Top Gun DUI Defense Attorney Myles Berman at 888-4-TOP-GUN, How do you represent me in court? What can you use to argue against a breathalyzer or an officer saying I was driving erratically? How can you defend me and successfully help me?
Well, a bunch of questions there. First of all,
You can't give away his trade secrets, Frosty.
yeah,
Trade secrets.
listen, the driving pattern often isn't reflective of somebody who's under the influence. For example, let's use speeding. Speeding is not somebody's going 90 miles an hour on the freeway at 65 miles an hour speed limit, and they're going 90. Well, that sounds pretty bad, except speeding is not a factor commonly associated with DUI. And if a person's driving straight, then that's even consistent with somebody who's not under the influence of alcohol. On the other hand, the breath test machines aren't, I don't think that they're accurate measurement. I know they're not an accurate measurement of somebody's blood. So, for example, if somebody has a 0.18 and a 0.20, that sounds pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
But a person doesn't go from a 0.18 to a 0.20 in a matter of 5 minutes. It's just scientifically impossible. So, or in reverse, a 0.20 to a 0.18. A person doesn't go from a 0.20 to a 0.18 in 5 minutes. So that's just an extreme example. Or somebody's arrested for DUI and they have a blood draw an hour after driving, and the blood is a 0.08. I can absolutely tell you with absolute certainty that at the time of driving, the person
They
wasn't.
weren't.
That's
yeah,
right.
It took a minute to.
The question is were they higher or are they lower?
interesting.
So there's a lot of factors that are involved in this. Plus, the field sobriety test, if somebody's doing it of your stature,
Top
Frosty,
heavy and
that you
wobbly,
do great.
yeah.
No, and you do great on it, but maybe you miss one or two things. That just may mean you're nervous. It doesn't mean that you're under the influence of alcohol.
That's why I need to call Myles L. Berman.
Yes, call Myles L. Berman, 1-888, the number 4, Top Gun, or topgundui.com, and at Myles L. Berman on Twitter. You always post where the checkpoint's
Myles
going to
with
be.
a Y.
Yeah, Myles with a Y. Thank you so much for coming in.
Love
And yeah,
seeing
be
you.
safe this holiday. We suggest you get an Uber
Be
or
safe
a Lyft.
tonight,
It's
too.
great
Designated
being here.
driver.
It's great seeing all
Yeah.
you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Myles. We're going to take a quick look at traffic. What's going on, Lisa?